So yeah, welcome everyone. This is the part 2 that I promised, and part 2 is not the last part. There's going to be at some point a part 3 as well. If I can just briefly bring us back, a lot of us were part of part 1, but just by way of a very brief summary of where we've been. Basically, the topic being fully human. And it's a topic title that I think on the one hand resonates with us, being fully human. I want to be that, pick me. Yes, I want to sign up for that. But on the other hand, it's also, and quite intentionally, a little bit controversial. So what do you mean with being fully human? Do you mean not everyone's fully human? Do you mean there's degrees? And who are you to say what is fully human? So there's that sort of element to it as well. And then one of the things that I proposed was in order to answer the question, how do I be fully human, or what does it mean to be fully human? The key question that we need to answer is, which story are we living in? So we need to answer that question in order to figure out what it means to be human. And then I offered this as the storyline. Now, it's outside of the scope of this thing to prove or to try and convince you that the story is true. I'm just going to assume it. I'm going to offer it as the story that we're all living in. So we're all living in it at some place. It's the true story we're living in. It's quite, well, not quite probably, I'm pretty convinced it's also the very best story to be human in. And what we then did in part 1 is we just had a look at the first part of that story. And and how that shed light on what it means to be human, or what it means to be fully human. And my thesis was that being fully human has everything to do with being made in the image of God. And then, supported by the text of Genesis 1, I then almost like unpacked the image of God a little bit and brought out these 3 aspects, these 3 elements. One of them is dominion. Dominion is a little bit of a Christianese word, but basically meaning our human capacities and the way we use those capacities, our human agency. But then also our identity, our very identity in terms of who we are. But there's got to be something about us where we image God, image now used as a noun, irrespective of our capacities and irrespective of how well or badly we use those capacities. So that's identity. And then third, just because it's so important, so key that it's worth bringing out separately, is relationship. The theme of love God, love neighbor is such a central theme in the Bible. So I'm just bringing that one out separately. One thing I then also said was these aren't sort of 3 neat categories into which you can carve a human being. They're more like 3 different ways in which you can look at a human being, 3 different, filters, vantage points. So it's almost like these are our 3 primary colors, but every part of us is obviously a mix of those colors. So they're just, 3 aspects, 3 ways in which we can look at a human being. So that's what we did last time. We just looked at the creation account. We brought out that. And now what we're going to do this time is we're going to look at how the story unfolds as we move to the fall part of the story. Now, remember I also said when we did creation, just about everything that we said there remains true as we move through the story. And it's going to be similar today. Just about everything that we're saying today is going to remain true as we move through the story. And yes, there will have to be at least a part 3 at some point as well. But let's move to this now. So basically, fall. By way of an introduction, I think, this is a difficult topic because in some ways, the focus is a little bit on the negative, right? It's like, what do you mean you guys got up at 6:30 in order to listen to, an hour of the fall or an hour of sin? So yes, the focus in some ways is negative, and it is bringing out the depth of the tragedy. But I'm very much hoping that we are also able to, as I do that we also see the pointers towards the rest of the story as well, the inevitable pointers as we go along. What I am hoping today will do is that it does help us answer what went wrong and where we are, that it offers an explanation for our experience, our experience of that sense of I'm not quite living to the full. I have the sense of I have untapped potential. My struggles, pain, there's brokenness. We have difficult relationships. We have difficult circumstances. Injustice prevails. Conflicts are frequent. We are not eradicating poverty. So hopefully what we go through today offers an explanation for that, a valuable diagnosis, maybe pitfalls to avoid, also helping us to see better and pointing us in the right direction, perhaps even already helping us to start envision. I'm going to get this word out, envisioning the good. The fall, what it is, I'm going to assume some familiarity with this. Okay, so fall, Genesis 3 and beyond, sin enters the human experience. Adam and Eve radically overreach the legitimate authority that God has given them, and are grasping at an authority of deciding what's good and evil is for themselves. Okay, so they're messing with the categories. They're going against the flow or against the design of how they were created to be in God's image. And in doing that, they lose, in some ways, their faithful representation of that image. Because after all, to faithfully represent the image, we require connection with, obedience to, perhaps even dependence on the one who gave the image. So that in brief, because as I said, I'm assuming that a current audience knows what fall is. By the way, some of what I'm telling you this morning won't be new to you, perhaps a lot. I'm trying to sort of almost like just perhaps bring it in a slightly different way, connected with image of God, and hopefully perhaps allow us to see more as we do it, or to see things in a fresh way. The fall, what it is and what it does and doesn't do, I think, is the next key thing. So this is absolutely key. It matters what we believe on this. What does the fall do, and what does the fall not do? And I think even in sort of churchianity circles, there are differences here. And yeah, it really matters. So let me give this a shot. What the fall does do, the image of God is suppressed. It is constrained in some way by us, as well as forces outside of our control. Okay? So through others, through illnesses, through disasters. We are both perpetrators and victims of the fall. I think that's they are both true. And every part of us is affected. It affects the entire image of God. No part of us is unaffected by this thing, by sin. And actually, even the Bible speaks of not just us, but all creation groaning. Okay, so whether that's sickness or impairment or aging. But also, I think important to notice is that when we take the Genesis 3 account, human beings are not cursed. So the serpent is cursed, the ground is cursed. Have you noticed that human beings, Adam and Eve themselves, are not cursed? Which brings us, I think, to the important bit of what the fall does not do. So the fall does not obliterate the image of God in us. And I've given us some scriptures. There's an Old Testament scripture and a New Testament scripture on your screen, in which the image of God is reaffirmed after the fall. So in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, God reaffirms that we are made in his image. So the image remains, even if it's incapacitated. Nothing we do and nothing that happens to us can take away the image. You can see why that would be important. And our sin and our brokenness are also not intrinsic to what it means to be human. So I suppose need to be a little bit careful with my wording, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. Okay, so sin, fall, these are they are degradations, they are distortions, they are, I used the leech metaphor in the invite to this talk, okay, it sort of leeches on us. So is sin a part of our identity? Yeah, but is it our core identity? Well, probably not. Does sin affect every part of us? Yes. Does it constitute every part of us? No. Does it make sense? I'm just trying to sort of draw some, almost like find the language for this as well, which is going to be so important. So I think one of the things we need to watch out for is how we, sometimes we use language like losing one's humanity, or diminishing someone's humanity, or dehumanizing someone. And I'm sort of going, are we sure about that language? Is it actually possible to really dehumanize? Okay, if I can't, if outside of Christian circles, the phrase image of God doesn't mean much to someone, and I'm left with words like humanity, then I need to be careful not to then too easily speak of losing that humanity. The image of God cannot be lost, perhaps even cannot even be diminished. Perhaps the way we can say it is the expression of the image of God in us can be diminished, but we are still in the image of God. So what if our humanity or our humanness cannot be lost? What if our personhood cannot be lost? So I think that is, you can see how that would be important in to us. Some metaphors that I've come across that I found helpful in this regard. So choose the one that works best for you. One metaphor I've heard is the idea of a glorious ruin, that is a metaphor for who we are in this created but also fallen state. This is an image, I think, from Francis Schaeffer. Basically, the idea here is, you can see that this is something amazing, but it's also unable to fully function for its intended purpose, and it cannot fix itself. But there is that sort of that sense of that hope for a master builder to come along and see its potential and restore it. So this is a both and, right? It's not just glorious, it's not just ruin. And it's important, again, that we're able to see the both and. Some worldviews only see the one or only the other, and then we get ourselves into all sorts of trouble with that. It's both and, glorious ruin. A second metaphor would be that of an artist's picture that has been vandalized by, I don't know, painting or grinding over. Okay, so somebody smeared something over the picture. And notice that is the metaphor. The metaphor isn't, it's a picture that's been burned to ashes. You see the difference? It's still there. The image is there. It's restorable at the hands of an expert. But right now, there's less visible evidence of that image. Sometimes it's hard to spot now, whether in ourselves or in others. The third metaphor would be that of a badly tuned old piano. Okay, so this piano has been through some things in its life. It doesn't really play on key anymore. But you would still recognize if a master pianist, if one of the great pianists were to come and play something on it, you would still be able to recognize an awesome melody. And then lastly, this is just somebody else brought me onto this when I gave an earlier version of this talk. This, I forget the name of this, but this Japanese pottery technique where something is broken and then reassembled and then basically put together with some precious metal like gold. Now, this may be perhaps a slightly too optimistic view of who we are. I don't think we're quite as neatly fixed as that in our current state. But I love the imagery. It's a very hopeful imagery. It's a lovely way to see it. So there you have it. Perhaps some ways of trying to understand our current state as both created and fallen. And then what I thought we'd do is just spend a moment to reflect. Then what does it mean for us to be fully human post-fall? So I don't think you need to say it out loud, but I'm just going to give you a few seconds. Sort of try and put it together in a sentence. How would you describe what it means to be human, or what it means to be fully human where we are now, post-fall? So what is it that we can realistically expect and hope for and strive for now in a way that doesn't almost like over expect or under expect? So try formulate a way of saying, okay, to be fully human now, or to be human now, is to give you a moment for that, and you'll see why I'm going to do that just now. So have a go. Okay, so here's the thing. So whatever you chose, well, two things actually. One is, does your answer encompass the full image of God? Right. So I think whatever answer we have, let it be an answer that in some ways brings in all three of those elements, our dominion or agency, our capacities, our very identity, and our relationships. Okay, so if your definition is only, for example, around the capacities, remember that's probably not full enough. You'd probably need to add and expand to your definition. The other thing that would be interesting to just bring out is the answer you chose. Does your answer work for all people at all times? And you can see why this is important, because sometimes, you know, again, depending on where you go, you might get some pop psychology answers of, I don't know, well, to be fully human is to follow your dreams, or to be whoever you want to be. But remember, whatever your answer is, it's got to work for all people at all times. So it's got to work for that person in the wheelchair. It's got to work for the person who's imprisoned unjustly. Your answer on what it means to be fully human has got to work for someone who's just lost a loved one, right? It's got to work for all people. Otherwise, your definition isn't big enough. So in some ways, perhaps a partial answer is also just almost like being able to work faithfully with what we have, right? And we've been in very different situations, very different contexts. We're also very different personalities. Our answer has got to work even for a guy hanging on a cross, right? Okay, so sneak preview to part 3 is going to have everything to do with Jesus, right? Jesus is the one who is fully human, fully God as well, but fully human. Jesus on the cross, fully human. And his options are limited at that point, right? But he's still able to pray. He is still able to forgive. He is still able to have that very important conversation with the 2 others crucified with him. He's still able to take care of the future for his mother. So, yeah, what is your answer? And does it work for all people at all times, in all situations? Moving on, I have quite a bit of ground to cover, so apologies if this is going fast. I thought I'd bring out 2 important things around this fall and the dynamics of sin in our lives. And I've called that idols and masks. And in the present day context, I need to clarify what I mean and don't mean. So with idols, I don't mean this. And with masks, I don't mean this. So let's go to what I do mean. Idols is, these things. I don't know if you're able to read if you're on a small screen, but all those things that we put into the idol position in our lives. So the dynamics of idolatry, what idols are images. What's so interesting in a way, I don't speak Hebrew, but apparently the Hebrew word for image and the Hebrew word for idol, that's the word sometimes used for idols is the word for image. Okay, so we image God, but then we break the second commandments by making an image of God, right? And so what idols are is anything. Sometimes they're bad things, but most of the time they are good things that we are elevating to ultimate things. I think Tim Keller talks about our loves, what we love, what tugs at our heartstrings, what captivates our hearts and minds. And why do we fall for this stuff? Well, if you think about where we are in this current situation, our capacities and our agency is damaged. And with that also comes a type of a vulnerability that we don't like. And so what the idols promise is an increased capacity or authority. Okay, you can now, I don't know, do more or have power, and I can make you invulnerable to this or that. So I think that is the sort of the promise that the idol often brings. Idolatry then is a worship disorder. We all worship, so it's just a question of what it is that we worship. You know, Isaiah speaks a lot about idolatry, and often where he's going, or sometimes where he's going, is he's basically saying you become like the idol that you worship. So if it's this, I don't know, the statue carved out of wood, you know, you're going to become like it, mute and dumb and unresponsive. So the idea here is, if you worship the true God, you will be imaging him as you should. But if you worship anything else, you will be molded into its shape over time in some shape or form. And so this idea of idolatry as image substitution is I think really important, where we're replacing God with something less than him, okay, an image of him, a substitute. But also, there's this other component to it. We sometimes miss that component. We're replacing his image in the sense of his image in us, ourselves, our neighbor. We're replacing that with something less than human. Okay, so we are made in God's image. My neighbor is made in God's image. And now I'm replacing that with, if I'm idolatrous, with something else, with money or with power. So an idol is a God substitute, because the idol promises to give me what God already wants us to have in some ways. But notice the idol is also a human substitute. Our idol is less than human. It's less than our neighbor. We reduce ourselves and each other. So, you know, whatever the idol is, you know, whether it's beauty or work or wealth or some group or some cause or some ideology, some distraction, impact can be an idol, control can be an idol, all those things, security, comfort. We are actually replacing not only God with something less than him, but also almost like our neighbor with something less than who they are in the image of God. I'm hoping that makes some sense. And then the other big thing that comes out here is idolatry as injustice, because again, think of some of the Bible storylines. In the Bible, injustice often follows idolatry, because if I replace my neighbor with something less than my neighbor that I'm looking for, then inevitably I'm going to mistreat my neighbor. And especially if I hold some degree of power, I'm going to mistreat the vulnerable. So I forget whose quote this is. It's either Andy Crouch or Tim Keller. Idolatry's image distorting price is always highest for those who are the most vulnerable. So again, I think that is, you know, when we talk of idolatry, often we think of, you know, the sort of the personal morality thing. But notice it's a lot bigger. A lot of the injustices in the world can be very well explained through idolatry. And then the dynamics of masks. So I think that's what I mean with the mask. The mask as something to hide who we truly are and to pretend to be someone that we're not. And notice then that the mask is also an image substitution, because the mask is in a way a diminishing of the real. Okay? There's pretense, there's perhaps hypocrisy, there's that carefully constructed public persona. And as we do that, things are not the way that they seem. We are displacing the real with the unreal. Okay? So it's an image substitution. It disintegrates us in some ways. We are no longer integrated beings, because now we have this disconnect between who we are on the outside and who we are on the inside, between what I'm projecting to be and who I really am. Of course, a lot of people will then point out and say, and social media amplifies that. And but yeah, just that that way of disintegrating ourselves by wearing the mask and then having that disconnect between outer and inner. So the effects of the fall, the effects of sin. I'm not sure who first used the horse metaphor and the idea of staying in the saddle of the horse instead of falling off the horse on this side or that side. So the idea of this metaphor, you'll see where it's going now, is it's possible to fall off a horse on either side. It might have first been Martin Luther that used the analogy. I find this this imagery extremely useful. So to bring it to today's topic, so being on the horse, that is, if I'm in the fullness of reality, that is the healthy place to be, in the saddle. Whereas if I'm off the horse, this side or that, that's the effect of sin. That's the reduction of reality. So if I'm in the saddle, that's the fullness of my human expression, perhaps even the place where I and others, where we grow, where we flourish. It is possible to fall off the horse by anything that diminishes ourselves and others. Okay? That is, there are many ways of defining sin. To me, one of the most helpful ways of defining sin is that which diminishes us or others in some way. So anything that in some ways reduces us, damages us, wounds us, distorts us. So I think that's the obvious one that we see. But then it's also possible to fall off on the other side, which is what I've called almost like the inflated self, right? Where the idol that we're following actually promises us, I'm going to enlarge your life. I'm going to make your life bigger. But what it actually does is it's just an inflation. It's a little bit like a balloon that you would blow up. Okay, it looks really big, but it's hollow inside. There's no substance to it. Okay, so it's just puffed up. It's not solid, right? And so I think these are the two ways, the two things that sin does to us. It either diminishes us, or it inflates us, which is actually also a form of diminishing. It's the one that looks good on the outside, but it's actually just a dilution, a bloating, a hollowing out. And if we were to now take that and apply it to the three parts of the image of God triangle, actually, before I get there, I had this slide just to illustrate that a little bit. We do this diminish and inflate thing to ourselves all the time, and to each other, right? So these are things I've heard people say. Some of them, we might have said ourselves. Notice, see if you can categorize. It really shouldn't be difficult. Which of those is a statement that diminishes, and which of those are statements that inflate? Right? So go through one or two examples. That's not the way we do things around here. Okay, so your new creative way of doing things differently is not welcome. It's a reduction. You need to sort of fit the mold, right? It's a statement that is not intentionally, but that diminishes. Be whoever you want to be. That's a classic inflation statement. Let's be honest. You can't be absolutely anyone you want to be. You shouldn't. Okay, you shouldn't be trying to redesign yourself from scratch. Grown men don't cry. Okay, now, what that does is basically says, okay, well, men are meant to have a much, reduced emotional spectrum now. There are certain places on the spectrum they're not allowed to go. So can you see how it's a total narrowing down? And then just go through the others yourselves. Don't think, just believe. Heard that one, unfortunately, too often. Okay, it's like, you can become a Christian, but we want you to keep your brain at the door. It's a diminishment. You can't take all of yourself along. You can only bring part of yourself to this party. It's a reduction. So all of these ultimately actually end up being reductionisms, right? Because whether it's the diminished version or the inflate version, they are reductionisms. Off the horse, this side or that side, is a reduced reality. So now let me bring that sort of horse and saddle metaphor to each part in this triangle. So let's try the first one. So what I have for each of those three is a way of falling off the horse on this side or on that side. So it's just an attempt, almost like at a model that I think is useful for us to understand and navigate reality and relationships. So in terms of dominion, there are two ways that would degrade. If you can't see that now at the bottom of your screen because you got the menu in the way, apologies. It says domination and abdication. So through sin, through the effects of the fall, our healthy dominion, our agency in reliance and in dependence on God, accountable to Him, in service of Him, guided and empowered by Him, reduces, becomes damaged, becomes reduced, and becomes either the domination or abdication. So in terms of the domination, you can see there again, that's where this injustice thing comes in, where our responsible and loving use of power becomes abuse, where it now becomes me versus you, or my group versus your group. And now I just want to come out on top and stay on top, or at least not end up at the bottom. And then often this becomes just, instead of the power of love, it just becomes raw power without love. Think of, even in our history, think of what apartheid did and was. Apartheid was a domination that actually decided who gets to be in the image of God and who gets to have dominion. That's what it tried to do, right? So that's a total, that's an example of the domination thing. And of course, there's also that's I suppose, the inflation side of the horse. And then the more obviously reduced side is the abdication side, where I'm kind of like not showing up to apply my capacities or to fulfill my responsibility, where I'm not defending and protecting and uplifting the vulnerable, where I'm too distracted or I don't know, or too busy revolving around myself. And just to, I suppose, point that out, but I don't think I need to, is even during something like lockdown, we actually see those dynamics at play, right? We do see dominion becoming domination, becoming power games, where now people, come out and sort of start to, bring the little dictator out in them, or start to use the situation for jostling for power and seeing, how can I gain from this? And we also see the abdication side, where I just make lockdown about me, instead of also saying, look, how can I use my agency to and my privilege perhaps to help others and to reach out. When I use lockdown as almost like as a way of social distancing in the wrong way. Remember, this phrase social distancing is actually a very, very unfortunate phrase. We're not trying to social distance. What we're doing, spatial distancing. That's what this is about. Is how to spatially distance, but precisely not socially distance. The abdication would be, I'm now removing myself from the responsibilities that I have towards others. Okay, so that's the dominion part. In terms of the identity part, so this is in terms of who we are. In terms of the identity part, here's my attempt at showing what it reduces to. So again, it can reduce in one of two ways. In terms of how we understand our identity as human beings, through the effects of sin, our understanding of who we are gets distorted in one of two ways. So either the inflationary way is that we sort of think we're little gods, or the more obviously diminished way in which we think we're just beasts or bots. Let me just try and explain that a little bit. So in terms of the gods thing, so there are some, I suppose, some of the Eastern worldviews, the idea of, all is God, God is all, we're all gods, and not just Eastern worldviews, there's also their Westernizations as well. But there's also, I think, just the form of, how do I say this, where I almost like feel I need to take on the God role in my life, in terms of shaping my identity, where basically my entire identity is something that I need to shape. Remember, if you were there in part 1, I was talking about the idea of, this wasn't my quote, but I really loved it. The idea of the image of God is that about us, which goes all the way down, right? It is the most core thing about us, is that we're made in the image of God. It's the one thing that goes all the way down. But now, in this distortion where I sort of feel I need to take on the God role about my identity, I then get to, basically what that means is, I got to shape my identity from scratch. I got to put something in that goes all the way down. And it's something other than image of God that then inevitably I put in this place of what goes all the way down. Okay, so now it's, I don't know, my politics. That is the one thing about me that defines me, or my gender identity, or whatever it might be. And then you can see what happens as a result of that. I think this explains a lot of the polarization that we're currently experiencing. Because if something other than image of God is what I think goes all the way down in my identity, well, then we cannot have a conversation about that other thing without me feeling that you are totally judging me, that you are totally invalidating me. Okay, so yeah, if my politics is the thing about me that goes all the way down, we cannot have a political discussion, okay, because you're attacking me the moment we have that discussion. You see that? So, and I suppose, I mean, you can see also, these are all pointers to possible solutions already as well. What if this self-creation of my identity, this be whoever you want to be, that's not a burden I need to bear, right? I don't have to bear the burden of who I am in the very core of my existence, of what gives me value. I don't need to bear the burden of the shape that reality takes. That's God's job, not mine. I don't need to bear the burden of what to do with my guilt and what to do with my fear, etc. Okay? So there can be, I think, a huge relief, a huge liberation, and just realizing this is what I'm doing, and it's not good. It's a diminishment. It's a reduction. And then just the other one is the beasts and the bots. So what I mean there is with beasts, just like is the view that says we are nothing more than a highly evolved animal, and you can see that there's a huge pressure, I think, a huge pull in our world towards that view. Okay, we're just a highly evolved animal, and I think you can also you can see what sort of problems arise from that. Okay, because we then lose that sense of our robust human identity, and we often find that when we just have a capacities-based view of the human being, if we forget that there's something about identity that irrespective of capacity. So if we just look at capacities, then we go, okay, well, how are we qualitatively different from animals? Okay, is it because we use language? No, dolphins can do that. Is it because we make tools? No, monkeys can do that. Can you see, if I'm just capacities based, then I'm actually losing that that sense of unique human identity. And then it's similar with regard to the bots. So what I mean is robots, or in a world of artificial intelligence, the similar problem that we had with differentiating ourselves from the beasts is now also with the bots. So the huge pressure is to see the human being as nothing more than a fancy piece of organic hardware running some fancy software. And there too, we increasingly, we're going to struggle with the differentiation with what it means to be human. capacities-based, only a human can drive a car, right? Well, no. Only a human can recognize images. No, AI can do that now. Only a human can compose music. No, AI has composed music as well. So I think the reason I'm bringing this out is I'm wondering whether Christians can actually make a key contribution here to our public discourse, to our understanding of what it means to be human, to maintain that robust sense of our humanity, of self, in against so many of the very tempting reductionisms that are out there. Okay, I'm nearly done. Thirdly, then, the relationships, our healthy sense of and connectivity of relationship is reduced either to individualism or to collectivism. Now, I'm aware that, collectivism, there's a particular political definition of that. All I mean is individualism is the individual is king. I'm number one, at the expense of others. And then collectivism is almost the inverse. It's the collective that's king, but at the expense, to some extent, of the individual. So those, to me, are the most common diminishers of a healthy relationism. Individualism, it's all about me. It's me versus you. Collectivism, it's about us. It's also then becomes an us versus them. It becomes a my group versus your group, because collectivism is seldomly large enough to include everyone, right? It draws a boundary between us and them. And so we have basically, in some ways, we have the individual self and we have the collective self, where we are stifling or perhaps even abusing the individual in the name of preserving the group, in terms of unity at all costs, as opposed to the healthy, I suppose, which isn't, I'm leaning on Marsh Moyle here to some extent with regard to the slide. He says, well, there's individualism, collectivism, or Trinitarianism. Okay, so that's the healthy one, because remember, we are made in the image of a Trinitarian God. And the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, three persons in one being, holds both unity and diversity together. Right? Individualism is just diversity. Collectivism is just unity. But in the Trinity, unity and diversity come together in a beautiful way. It's also in the Trinity. The Trinity, in a sense, is other-centered, right? The three members of the Trinity focus on each other, whereas individualism is not other-centered. It just focuses on the individual self. And collectivism actually also isn't other-centered. It just focuses on the collective self. It also doesn't look beyond. Whereas then, if we image God well, and the Trinitarian God well, then we have that other-centeredness that is big enough to include everyone. Okay, who is my neighbor? Everyone. Good. I think that summarizes it. There you have the model. I'm kind of hoping this is more or less useful. I left 15 minutes for questions, for discussion, for objections, for additions. Go. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Thorsten. That was very, very interesting. Just on the last point you made, that really struck a chord with me. I teach human rights, and in human rights, you've got that division between individualistic rights and collective rights. And it's almost like the whole world is split between Western or the northern side advocating for individual rights, and your Eastern or the Southern nations advocating collective rights. And it's always that extreme. There seems to be no sort of middle ground for that. And both have advantages and disadvantages. So that just struck me, just as an example illustration.
Yeah, thank you. But Natalie, please tell me, though, that there are some really good efforts at saying, no, it shouldn't be just the one or just the other. We need to bring both of them together. And there are some places where they bite each other and where they rub off against each other. And work hard.
We do get it now. Yes, it has evolved to that. Originally when they signed human rights treaties, the first treaty that came about was in 1966, and it was very interesting. They couldn't make one treaty because there was this division. So they ended up with two treaties, one being civil and political rights, which is individualistic, and the other one socio-economic rights, which is collective in a sense. And most countries from sort of in the Cold War opted for one or the other treaty and not both. But today, the large majority of countries have signed both. So we are seeing it, but if I discuss this with students, people still very much support one or the other. And just for interest, I always ask which is the most important. And until about 2 years ago, the majority of my students were all in favor of socioeconomic rights. They all believed that civil and political rights should be restricted if it meant that you could get education and healthcare and all of that. That has shifted, and today I see about a 50-50 split between my students supporting one or the other.
Okay, that's interesting. And now, of course, lockdown brings an interesting dynamic to that as well, okay? Because in many ways, we willingly and quite probably validly forfeiting some of our individual freedoms right now for the greater good, in order to protect others, or at least that's what we're hoping is what's happening.
There's a lot of debates in Germany, for example, about the tracking apps and all of that, because they see that as a huge imposition against individual rights. But now the argument is it's in favor of the collective. So we see that shift towards the collective over the individual happening there.
Yeah, I've certainly also, just seen some of and possibly, those are some of the things we need to be thinking about. I think we are just blindly going into this, lockdown mode without asking those hard questions, and we need to ask those questions. And so we need to be very astute and very, fully present to what it is that we're doing and who it is that we're becoming. So, thank you. By the way, what I do, just Natalie, you can't do that where you are, but me at a Bible college can do that. I then, as I bring these two options up, I say, in individualism, I am the most important thing. In collectivism, the group is the most important thing. In Christianity, what is the most important thing? A little bit of a trick question, but luckily, usually somebody says God, which is the right answer. But here's the thing: because God is the most important thing, therefore, both the individual and the collective or the community have value, right? Because God, therefore, both sides carry a lot of significance. It's because it's a significance that they don't have to come up with themselves. It's not a self-generated value. It's a givenness. It's a God-given value, and that so changes the picture. Yeah. Yes.
Good morning, Thorsten. Thanks for the talk. So I'm not going to put my video on just because my internet is quite unstable. But it's also possible that I'm not wearing a shirt. So, all right, cool. So last night, my wife and I were watching Frankenstein, the play, by the Royal National Theatre, and it was quite interesting actually how some of the themes in Frankenstein really resonate with where we are now. I think, for instance, the monster who Frankenstein creates is this nameless monster. He doesn't give the monster a name, and the monster in turn, obviously takes over his life. He's very desolate, very much like AI. Thorsten. And it's quite interesting that this lady wrote this book 220 years ago, and it harkens to a time we're in now, where I credit my wife for thinking about this, because she said, look, this is like AI, this is like bots as we're having it now, where it's just taking over our lives, and it's so it's quite an interesting one on when you're talking about beasts and bots and that kind of thing, how identity can also be in the hands of things we've created. Just more like a comment, maybe to attract more commentary. I don't know.
Sure. Okay. So again, an attempt to do the nuance. Thank you, Ndaluma. if we sort of, I don't know, express ourselves creatively into the things that we make and shape or form, I think that is part of our God-givenness. All right, that's a good thing. That I don't know, whatever it is that even my handwriting or whatever it is that I do, that it has in some ways my signature, my font on it. I think that's a good thing. The trouble with something in an AI world is that we are now doing something else. We are trying to very almost like explicitly shape something in our image to look like us and to pretend to be like us. And so a lot of AI is also, not all of it, but it is about, how can we almost like mimic humanity as best as possible, so that on the surface it's going to be more and more difficult to see the difference. Okay, so increasingly you don't know where the person you're talking to on the other side is a human being or a bot. It's intentionally designed that way, and that certainly we need to watch that the effects this is going to have, probably reductionistic, degrading, diminishing effects on how we understand our humanity and also how we relate to each other. Okay? So AI is going to affect not just how we relate to it, but also how we relate to each other and how we understand ourselves. And that is, again, that's important think work that we need to do.
Absolutely.
Connecting with what you're saying.
Yeah, sure, Thorsten. Just to finish off with, one of the interesting, I think, reflections that the beast, as it were, the created monster makes at some point. It's quite poignant, actually. He says, "I was like a blank slate, and you taught me." He had this power of assimilation, right? He could assimilate from the world around him, and he says, "You taught me how to hate, how to become desolating, how to become humiliating, how to debase, etc." And so it was actually quite. It was like, whoa, a sobering moment. Just how we can create things that then reflect our fallen, the distorted side of our fallen nature, and it's quite terrifying. Yeah, sure. Thanks, man.
Quite terrifying, but I suppose just on the sound of that, quite honest as well. So I appreciate the honesty that's being brought out there, because remember, one of the temptations is whatever solution we create. So whether it's artificial intelligence or I don't know, some economic system or some political system, that we're just gonna create a perfect world through that. That's the temptation, right? Hey, whatever we put in place, it's going to make it better for us. And then almost like underestimating the effect of the fall in us. Whatever we create is going to be mixed bag, like we are mixed bag, and not pretend otherwise.
Yeah, so I'm enjoying the way in which this has become a kind of nice demonstration of the Aristotelian dilemma of finding a golden mean between two extremes. And it's just also demonstrates when you name these different sides of the horse on which you can fall off, we're still tempted to pick one over the other. We still want to say, okay, now we have names for them. Which one is better? Which way do we want to fall? And that, of course, is not the point, but it's very hard to know what that golden mean between them actually is. So just one suggestion, this is something that I think about in principle. Obviously, it's often very hard to practice, but I think love helps, in particular when you are in relationship with someone else, to find that golden mean, because if you really care about them, you won't give up on them, for example. So this connects with what Claude was saying. If you hold a view that you think will definitely enrich the other person if they were to see your side of the story, you will carry on and you won't give up on them. But at the same time, you will have sufficient grace and humility. Say, well, maybe I am wrong, but also, even when I still believe that I'm not wrong, I will give this person space. And so love is just an amazing thing when it's really there, when you really experience it for someone near you, and you have the patience and the humility you see how that helps you to find a kind of golden mean.
Thank you. So yeah, so I mean, love again as the central thing, I think, in the whole picture, right? In who God is, and then in who we are or meant to be. Just a small little addendum, Isaac, if I may. The Aristotle's idea of the golden mean, I think he doesn't do that, but the word mean is a little bit unfortunate, right? Because what we're not talking about is a nice average, a nice 50-50. But I think Aristotle doesn't go there. I think he is talking about that the middle is the higher ground. So I think what we need to be careful of is that we don't just try and average out the two. Because if you just do an average between the one side of the horse and the other side of the horse, you're just right underneath the horse, right? And you're still, so that's not yet the higher ground, so to speak. So think of, we're not, dominion isn't just a nice trade-off between domination and abdication. It's something, a healthy dominion is something completely different. Or, where Natalie was going with individualism, collectivism. Okay, I'm not sure if our answer just lies in a nice average, but in finding something higher than that. That's why I was alluding to, what's the most important thing? God. Well, if God is, well, then perhaps it gives us a different perspective on the dilemma.
That's a good point. So it's a false dilemma. There's a third way. So I like that.
Yeah. So often you will find that the horse is this. Now mixing the metaphor, right, is this ability to stand in tension in some way, of holding a both and, of keeping two things together, boldness and humility, mercy and justice, truth and love, in the world, not of the world. A lot of the saddle is being able to do that both and.